Good afternoon, fill in the blanks family. It's Tenitra Batiste. I'm here with Jarvis Davis, but we have a special guest with us this afternoon. We are so excited because we have been trying to connect with Dr. Jason Cable for a while now, and finally all things have aligned and we're able to talk to him today. So we're really excited about that. In case you were wondering, we'll just give you the very high level of his credentials and his resume, because man, oh man, does he bring an awesome background to the leadership within the Southwestern Athletic Conference. So Dr. Cable, of course, is the Senior Associate Commissioner for Administration within SWAC. But just to tell you where he came up from, where he came through, he, of course, began his career as a student athlete, just like our own Jarvis. So he was conferred with a variety of accolades while at Alcorn State. Then he transitioned into assistant men's basketball coach and health and PE instructor at ASU. Also served within that athletic administration as the assistant to the AD before moving on to Livingstone College. So in addition to the work that he did there, the programs led him to Jackson State, where literally he not only focused on that athletic side, but the student athlete side. Dr. Cable keeping those students with a 3.0 GPA or higher. He as well is focused on education, completing his doctorate in 2019, PhD, higher education from J-State. And of course, like I mentioned, he is currently the Senior Associate Commissioner for the SWAC, took on that position in December of 2018. So my first question for you, Dr. Cable, is this: where do the allegiances lie? Do we lean a little bit more for Albany State? Do we lean a little bit more for Jackson State? Where do the allegiances lie?
Oh, within the conference, most definitely.
Good answer, Dr. Cable.
At this point,
Good answer.
Both of my experiences at those institutions were phenomenal, and I wouldn't trade them for the world.
Absolutely. And speaking of the conference, Jason, it is amazing because I remember earlier this year when I found out that we were going to be in the midst of the 100-year celebration for the SWAC. And I thought, oh, this is going to be fantastic. So many plans, if you will. And of course, that, like much of what we're accustomed to, has been impacted by the pandemic. But tell us a little bit about what it means for the Southwestern Athletic Conference to be a century old and some of the great accomplishments that the conference has had thus far.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm just very privileged and excited just to be a part of the conference at this time. I mean, I won't see another 100-year anniversary. I think it speaks to the resilience of our 10-member institutions.
Yeah.
When you talk about going through recessions, you're talking about a lack of funding, you're talking about just a wave of social injustice, segregation, all those things that our institutions have gone through, off the field of play. And we still have been able to produce the best and the brightest. And if you look at on the field of play, I mean, I think that's self-explanatory in terms of the number of Hall of Famers we have in football, basketball, and baseball as well. And so as we embark on a new century, we're excited to add Bethune-Cookman and FAMU. I think that's an excited point. We're able to add them in our 100th year. And kind of show that stability that we've had over the 100 years and the growth that's projected moving forward.
Yes.
Dr. Cable, you talking about the addition of FAMU and Bethune-Cookman. Take us into how that process actually goes about. Is it a matter of schools reaching out to the conference, or did you all say, hey, what would you think about joining us and getting into our conference and like the rich history you just talked about?
Well, I think it's about, and I'll just switch roles. I think it's like being a female, right? You don't necessarily reach out to the male traditionally, although there may be interest there. So we played the role of the female, and FAMU and Bethune played the role of the male. They showed some interest, at the point in time in which they showed interest. A process ensued with our presidents as well as our athletic directors and senior women administrators, but ultimately we were interested as well, and we decided to investigate. And once we investigated, we came to the conclusion that both Bethune-Cookman and FAMU would add value not only to athletics but in academics as well.
And you talk about that value that's being added, Dr. Cable. You look at the addition of someone with such a marquee name like a Deion Sanders to your alma mater at Jackson State. as head football coach. And what is that going to mean as well? Because Jarvis and I, we talk about it all the time, and we think that it's really bigger than just him taking on that head coaching role at Jackson State. We think it's what it could mean for the SWAC or even for Black college football.
Yeah, it's hard to quantify. I mean, if you just look at what it's done for the city of Jackson, the state of Mississippi, just off the grid of the conference and the athletic department at Jackson State, it just speaks volumes about the progression, about the interest, about the social media impressions. I mean, he has 1 million followers, so everything he does, he has eyes on him. And so that's eyes on Jackson State, that's eyes on the Southwestern Athletic Conference, and that's eyes on the state of Mississippi. And so we're in the early stages of this thing. He hasn't played a game yet. There's been a lot of interest. So I imagine if we move forward to spring season, you will see the residual impact of hiring a coach like Deion Sanders.
You talked about the spring season, Dr. Cable. I think that's probably one of the more intriguing things as far storylines as far as college football goes, because I think about HBCUs being on display when nobody else is playing. Obviously there's spring football practices and everything, but there's a big difference between spring practice and actual games going on. What do you think that means as far as the HBCUs, the SWAC conference being on display or having a lot more eyeballs than you normally would have in that time?
Well, high level visibility, as you just mentioned, we're the only show in town from that standpoint, as well as the exposure. We're given an opportunity for students that may be making a decision to play football or basketball or any sport the next level, or just making a decision to go to college. They're getting the opportunity to see us, in the mainstream on TV. And so we are in the process of leveraging the spring season against opportunities to be on major networks. So that's where we are right now. So we're in the beginning stages, nothing solidified, but we're optimistic and feel as if we have a product during a time where no one else is playing, which can be viewed as a top-rated product in the spring.
Yeah, absolutely. And you look at just the interest level that has been garnered over the last 5 years, that the Celebration Bowl has come back in a big way on the big stage, and even having the Black College Football Hall of Fame here in Atlanta as well. That's been a huge piece to just shine a spotlight on football, Black college football in particular. And so there are actually 2 questions I have for you, but let me hit you with this one first, Dr. Cable, because there was a word that you used that made me have some thoughts. Mainstream, right? So one of the things that we are seeing a resurgence in, and my thought goes to sort of some of my play nieces who are going to be playing volleyball, albeit different conference, but playing volleyball at Howard next year. They were a couple of young ladies, brilliant young ladies, beautiful, and just highly sought after players that flipped. And you're starting to see this trend, and you look at those young ladies and you look at some of the other top shelf athletes, the blue chip athletes who are transitioning back and considering, if not choosing, to sign with our HBCU. So what does that say in terms of what the profile is, and just that spotlight and that support, and that, as Jarvis used the word intriguing, that intrigue about HBCU athletics at this point?
I think it's the awareness. There's a lot of things that have happened, both kind of, exciting and positive, and some things that were brought about as a result of social injustice that has brought a positive light to HBCUs, not only the SWAC, but the MEAC, all HBCUs. And I think that positive light, has touched a number of student athletes as they make their decision. And so in some cases, they're not choosing a school based on facilities, or not choosing a school based on exposure. They're choosing a school in a situation where they can go there and become a better person. I say they can't do it somewhere else, but somewhere that they're comfortable, that they can come in, be themselves, kind of get trained up like football, right, for us, by us, right?
Yeah,
and, and that experience, I don't think you can put a price tag on it. And so when you have that exposure and you have student athletes making that decision, I think the next 100 years from the conference is even brighter, because I think we're in the beginning stages of the top tier blue chip athletes making a decision to take their careers in the pathway of HBCU.
And now you got me with 2 extra questions. So Jarvis, humor me on this one. But I wanted to go back with something that you said. And the first one is more of a comment, Dr. Cable, than a question. Maybe the second one is a question. But there's a comment that you put out there that I just wanted to park there for a second, because with Jarvis being an alumnus of Albany State, I'm an alumna of Xavier University of Louisiana. That's the one in New Orleans.
Xavier.
Thank you, yeah. Dr. Cable. Thank you so much. Because listen, we had virtual homecoming 2 weeks ago, and we literally DM bombed DJ Envy so much. He was our headliner. We were like, bruh, it is Xavier. Don't you put that X in there, yes. To the point, look, Dr. Cable, where he literally came online and he was like, man, I am being ambushed by these Xavier people about this X. So no, I appreciate you for that. But one of the things you mentioned that Jarvis and I talk about all the time, whether it's homecoming, which we all, Lord knows we all were traumatized by not having homecoming this year, but it's the village. That is the actual feedback that many of these blue chip athletes have talked about over and over again, including my nieces. They couldn't believe once they decided to flip, they made the announcement. They said, oh my God, where are all these people coming from, mom and dad? And we explained to them, that's the village. That's the X factor, or the intangible that you just talked about, that sets us apart from any other. So when you said that, I was like, oh, we got to stop it. We got to park right there for a second, because I got to hear more from Dr. Cable on even how the village has been an amazing support system for you as you've ascended in your career, and even as you ascended when you were playing ball back in your day.
Yeah, well, I just think as my time as a student athlete, you were being coached by your coach. I played for Davey Whitney. He's in the Basketball Hall of Fame. Great coach, great individual. But you had other coaches, football, baseball, the athletic director. Everyone would encourage you. So that village is real. I mean, I remember missing a class. You know, I missed very few, right? But I did miss.
right.
May have been
okay.
You know, and professors actually seeking you out to try to figure out what is going on, you know, and so that doesn't happen in all cases on all campuses. And I think as student athletes begin to make their decision as they transition from high school to college, they're becoming more aware of that. And they're becoming more aware of the experience through the exposure and everything that's happening right now in our nation that is pushing them, you know, back to HBCUs. And so for all intents and purposes, you know, we welcome them back. We want to make sure that we continue to develop our students and student athletes in a way that we can keep that pipeline flowing for the next 100 years.
Yeah. And as I think about that too, and hopefully Jarvis and I will get our opportunity to cover again in 2021, but I'm looking at the class of 2021. And when we talked about that on our show, there was so much excitement about the Black College Football Hall of Fame. You look at Coy Bacon from J-State, you look at Greg Coleman from FAMU, Jimmy Giles and Roynell Young from Alcorn State, and Winston Hill from Texas Southern, but also Willard Bailey, who coached at a number of HBCUs over the years. And it actually took me back to all of my experiences of covering Black College Football Hall of Fame, where you see those old heads, and then you see somebody who Jarvis and I are high on. We cover the Falcons, so we've been high on Chris Rowland for a minute now out of Tennessee State and what he's going to be able to do. And I can remember seeing Chris at one of those induction ceremonies and how that village of those honorees from years past just encircled him and came around to support him. So yeah, absolutely. The village is, as Eric Neighbors said, one of our supporters, coaching and facilities, brand, band, and the village. It's all a given when it comes to an HBCU.
Yeah, Jason, man, and I'm with you, man, because when you talk about, like, I remember, I'll never forget going into Albany State in my freshman year and having to go into developmental studies, and it was just two professors just took me under their wing and just put their arms around me, because, you know, I went to school to play ball, you know, to be quite honest, you know, so for them to just, you know, surround, you know, put their arms around me and just say, hey, this is how you do this. This is what you're supposed to do. And this is how you're supposed to, you know, go to class on day, talk to your professor, make sure they know your name, sit in front of the class. Just those little things that people, you know, sometimes take for granted. It was just those things just stuck with me, and they're still with me to this day. So but I want to bring us back up something that you mentioned earlier. You're talking about the social injustice that was going on now, and with you being in the SWAC office, what do you feel like your role was at that time for maybe or a student athlete or somebody you may have come in contact with that may have been a member, a student athlete at the time, or somebody who went to Alcorn State or may have gone to Jackson State? What do you feel like? I guess what will be your message to those kids at HBCUs that may have to go out into the world and have to prepare themselves to be able to leave that village or to leave that nest, that safe place that we have in HBCUs? What would be your message to them and how to deal with these things that we're dealing with today?
I would say first, I mean, you have to graduate, but at the same time, you have to educate yourselves, and that goes beyond the walls of any institution. And so, being aware and become an expert in something, right? Whatever your field is, become an expert in that field, and it gives you great leverage when you leave the institution as you get into your career path. And as you look at the social injustice, I think the best way that we can, I don't know, beat it, but combat it is through being aware, understanding who you are, where you came from, right? And also imparting that knowledge on the next generation. And so as you develop as an adult, young adult, leaving college, getting into your career, make sure that you're giving back and you're having those conversations with the young people that are in the place that you just left. And I think once we start talking about changing a culture, it starts there. And then also, as we progress in our career, the generational wealth piece, the socioeconomic status will begin to change. And those are long range and kind of lofty type ideas, but that's the place that we have to get to when we look at attacking social justice in our community.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that financial literacy piece is the real deal, man, because I think about, I'm 38 years old and I'm just now learning about stocks and investing and getting into those type of things. And I think that for me, I know I'm charging myself with, teaching my kids at an early age. I'm talking about elementary school all the way through high school and letting them know some of the things that can help combat, like you said, that can be used as a tool to combat those things that they're going to have to deal with as they get older.
Yeah. And a lot for our student athletes and our students in general to combat right now, because you're dealing with the pandemic and the pandemonium. So you've got civil unrest that they're dealing with and having to really be concerned about what life looks like for them, their safety on a day-to-day basis from a social unrest perspective. But then they've got the pandemic to be concerned about as well. And that's a very legitimate question, as all eyes are on HBCU college football, spring football in particular, to say, hey, we're watching the trends that we're seeing in ball that's being played in the fall. And of course, last week in D1 ball, there were 17 games that had to be either canceled or postponed. But in the general pantheon of things, that's a relatively small number, although, we do know that some of the top 10 teams were impacted. So my question is this, Dr. Capel, what are some of the things that you guys are putting in place on both sides of the ball? Like Jarvis said, on that side of having your student athletes continue to deal with the pandemonium and the civic unrest, but on the same token, preparing as a conference to deal with the ongoing pandemic?
Well, I think that there may not be one and the same, but they're same principles, right? And so on the pandemic side, we're following the science. The decision to postpone fall sports to the spring was a decision that we made that was based on the recommendations of our presidents and then looking at the trend. And so the NCAA and their medical group had already forecasted that we will be at this point right now in terms of the pandemic and in terms of COVID trending up. And so we just felt like we couldn't get a season in. But moving forward and just seeing what has happened to other conferences, other institutions, I don't know if we can avoid some of the stoppage, but I think that we're better prepared in our protocol and processes, having seen other conference and other institutions go through this fall sport. And so I think the tie-in to the social unrest is that you have to stay prepared. You have to educate yourself, and you want to put yourself in a position. Some things are uncontrollable, but you want to put yourself in a position that you can make the decision, right? That someone not making a decision for you. And so I think that's important. We want our student athletes to stay informed. We want them to put themselves in a position to be leaders, and we want them to have a voice. And so we encourage our coaches, our student athletes, to have a voice, to be productive citizens and continue to support each other. As often, I guess in almost all states, everything is closed. You get bored. You need support. Right. It's easily to let your mind drift into a state of unrest or even depression. So we just want to make sure that we continue to support each other through this time.
And I'm so glad you said that, Dr. Cable, because the mental piece of that is important as well. I was on a press conference earlier today for one of our local colleges, and literally, Dr. Cable, Georgia Tech's been off. Well, when they hopefully reconvene on Saturday against Duke, they will have had a 28-day layoff from their last game because of COVID. And so you look at that piece, and that's one of the things that Coach Jeff Collins talked about today. It's the mental piece. How have they kept those guys going? How have they kept them encouraged? And then coming up on the Thanksgiving holiday, for those who can't go home, how do they manage through that piece for them? And for those who are going home, but have to come back and have to go through intensive protocols, how do they manage it through? So I'm so glad you mentioned that piece about it's not just the physical aspect of it. There's also the mental aspect, and the conference and the respective schools looking at how to support the student athlete.
Yes. And I think that's important. I mean, you hit the nail on the head, but I just know as a student athlete, and Jarvis, you can attest to this as well. There's a system. At certain times of year, you're used to doing certain things. Playing football on Wednesday, what happens on Wednesday. Playing basketball, in that game plan, what happens on Thursday. And so when you take student athletes out of that protocol, I think you have to replace it with something. It can't just remain void, because then you leave room for them to make, decisions that may not be the best in the best interest of them or the institution.
Yes.
Yeah, man. That like when I think back to how old when I between 18 and 22, I didn't make the best decisions, unless I was on a schedule. That's why, waking up in the morning, watching film at 6 o'clock in the morning, and then going straight to class and not having a break to even think about going home. I'm going straight to class, and once I stay on campus long enough so I can go to practice, and once I go to practice, then I got to eat, and then I'm going home. And like you said, when you have what we're dealing with right now as a country, and just throwing a big monkey wrench in that, it's just like the coaches and all of the administrators and athletic directors, and that's just what I want to kind of ask you, like being in position, as the associate commissioner, like how is it knowing that you're making decisions that's going to have an effect on a lot of people?
Right. I think that we make the decisions, but our decisions are influenced strongly by the president's council. Right? Before we make a decision, that decision is vetted through the presidents and then trickled down to the athletic directors. And so although that decision is going to impact all 10 member institutions, before that decision is made, it's already been vetted. And so when we come to the podium, or the commissioner comes to the podium to make that decision, the best interests of all 10 member institutions, students, and student athletes have been taken into account. And so it takes the stress away, So there's a collaboration. There's broad-based participation in all the decisions that are made.
Yeah. Absolutely. And then we'd be remiss if we didn't mention, because obviously football is king. So football is where everything starts and stops. But how have you guys been able to navigate the waters of the pandemic and pandemonium, and also in support of athletes in other sports and determining how to manage through their seasons for this 2020, 2021 timeframe and even a little bit beyond? Because at some point, Dr. Cable, you do start asking yourself, okay, what is this going to look like for 21 and 22?
Absolutely. So our basic philosophy is to use what is available to us. Our commissioner, Dr. McCullen, sits on the men's basketball selection committee. And so he interfaces with Brian Hayline. He interfaces with other commissioners from the FBS conferences, and they have access to the best medical personnel available at this time. And so the information that he is getting, we push out to our institutions. The NCAA has put out a set of guidelines called the resocialization of sports, and that's for all sports. And so we empower our institutions to follow those guidelines. So it's not just for football, for all sports. And so within those guidelines, we feel as if we have the best practices associated with the current data and the science that's available to us. And so not to say that there won't be stoppage in play, that there won't be issues, but we think if we can hold close to those recommendations, then we'll be in a much better place for all sports.
Yeah, I think that's one thing. Like, that's why I've always, Tenitra and I've had plenty of conversations as we've, leading up to the college football season and going into, like, when you start off with the Ivy League making the decision first, and then when we start to see some the HBCU say, hey, we're not going to play, and I just totally understand it. But the one thing that I feel like people may feel like is wrong to bring up, the financial part of it too, right? Does it make sense? If it don't make dollars, it don't make sense, right? That has to be a part of that. I know the well-being and everything like that, but how far or how much did you all take into consideration that financial piece?
Oh yeah, that definitely was a part. It fell in right after student athlete welfare. Yeah. So you have to look at the financial piece. Yeah. And so the presidents have assessed their financial situation on campus. And so we felt as if, we could have a productive spring season, not to mention football, but with all sports. And so, yes, definitely to answer your question, Jarvis, finances wasn't number one, but it was definitely up there as we talk about priority and decision-making moving forward.
Yeah, that's understandable. I think it's a great question, and it's an honest question, because we do know that sports is a revenue generator, and the revenue that's generated, especially for football, is so critical for most schools around this country at all levels. So we appreciate you, Dr. Cable, for just being honest and transparent about some of those tough decisions and the considerations that the conference had to go through to get to the point of determining not only what would happen as it relates to college football, but how that trickle-down effect would be for those other sports as well as for those universities overall. So listen, we can talk to you for days and days and days about the SWAC, and certainly hope that this is not the last time that you'll join us. I always say, as an honorary Jaguar, because my entire family went to Southern University, except me. Long story that we do not have enough time for today, but
it's not too late. It's not too late.
Oh, look, Dr. Cable, they're still in my pockets. Oh, they still get my money. Yeah, so I'm a friend. Yeah, I'm a Jaguar friend. Yeah. And listen, that's the other thing as well that we push so very hard on this show, that in order for our universities to be able to compete both on the field and in the classroom, we're always after our alumni to support. So when spring football comes, all of those who are talking about how much they missed homecoming and how much they missed traveling with their universities, we certainly hope that they can get out there and support the universities, because like you said, at the end of the day, there's still a financial component. And if we want these universities to thrive and we want our students and our student athletes to thrive, then we've got to put the money behind that to support you guys, put the money where our mouths are.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a value attached with an experience, right? So everyone talks about the experience. But we got to make sure you put something back in the coffers to make sure that someone else has that
same experience
that you had. Yeah, so.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, like we said, thank you so very much for your time. We cannot thank you enough for that. And maybe as the season gets a little bit closer, we'll have you back on and really, really talk about some of the nuts and bolts of what spring black college football is going to look like in 2021. We know that everything these days looks different, so it's moving parts, and we will definitely be watching and supporting. So from the Fill in the Blanks family, we'd like to again thank Dr. Jason Cable for his time. If you want to follow him, Doc, it's at Jason Cable 1, or they can follow at the SWAC, right?
Correct.
To get all of their information up to the minute to find out what's going on in the amazing world of Southwestern Athletic Conference. Again, we congratulate you guys on 100 years in existence and are looking forward to 100 more, right, Jarvis?
Oh yeah, you already know. And 100 years of competing, getting us some of those SIAC teams on the schedule too.
He's always got a plug. Always got a plug.
Don't be scared. Like, we play some good football in D2 now. Come on now.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Well, we'll see you on the basketball court. You know, that's about all we do at Xavier. So we do track and field and a couple other things right now. We've been lobbying to get football back. It's been gone for a half a century, but hey, you keep putting dollars behind it and eventually it'll make sense to the university. So for Jarvis Davis, who you can follow, of course, at JarvisD90, you can follow me at Tenitra Batiste. You can follow the show at _fill in the blanks on Twitter, at fill in the blanks on Instagram. As always, this is where you can find us every Tuesday, 4 p.m. Eastern time, talking about all of the amazing things that are going on in the world of sports and where it meets the culture, because we are the culture. I'm Tenitra Batiste. We'll see you next time.
All right. Bye.
See ya.
Goodbye.